The evening was cold and the wind carried a damp smell of rain. People hurried along the street, clutching their coats, trying to make it home before the night got any darker. Under the flickering light of an old bus stop, a young woman sat alone on a bench, holding a worn-out blanket close to her chest. Her shoes were soaked, her hands trembled, and her eyes carried a tired look that went far beyond her age. She had been there for hours waiting for a bus she wasn't even sure she could afford. She wasn't used to begging or asking for help. A few months ago, she had a job, a tiny room she could call her own, and a few friends to talk to. But life had changed too quickly. The cafe she worked at closed down, and she couldn't find another job soon enough to pay her rent. One thing led to another, and before she realized it, she was carrying her life in a single bag. That night she sat there because she didn't know where else to go. Buses came and went, headlights flashing across her face, but she didn't move. She watched people laugh, talk, and go home, and she wondered when her life had last felt that simple. As she pulled her blanket tighter, she heard a soft voice nearby. "Daddy, can I give her my cookie?" The young woman lifted her head slightly and saw a little girl standing near the bus stop. She was holding a small paper bag from a bakery, her cheeks pink from the cold. Beside her stood a tall man, probably in his 30s, with kind but tired eyes. He looked at his daughter, unsure how to respond. The little girl waited, still holding the cookie in her hand. Her eyes focused on the woman on the bench. The father sighed softly and nodded. "Okay, but stay close to me." The girl's face lit up. She walked toward the woman carefully, her little boots tapping against the wet pavement. When she reached her, she held out the cookie. "You can have it. It's still warm." The woman blinked, surprised. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. "Oh, thank you," she whispered. Her voice cracked slightly from the cold and exhaustion. The little girl smiled and nodded like she'd just done something important. "It's okay," she said. "Daddy says sharing is good." The woman smiled weakly. "Your daddy is right." The girl tilted her head, studying the woman's face. "Are you waiting for someone?" The question caught her off guard. "No, sweetheart," the woman replied softly. "I'm just sitting here for a while." The girl frowned, her small eyebrows knitting together. "But it's so cold. Don't you have a home?" The woman looked down at her hands. "Not right now." The girl was quiet for a moment. Then, in a gentle, thoughtful tone, she said, "You need a home, and I need a mommy." The woman froze. The words hit her like a wave she didn't expect. Her eyes welled up before she could stop them. The father, who had been watching from a short distance, stepped closer. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "come back here." The little girl turned and ran to him, clutching his coat. The woman quickly wiped her eyes, embarrassed. She didn't want to cry in front of strangers, but the warmth in that little girl's words stayed with her. For the first time in a long time, someone had spoken to her with pure kindness, without pity or judgment. The bus arrived soon after, brakes squealing as it stopped. The father guided his daughter toward the door, but the girl stopped halfway and turned around again. "Come with us," she said loudly, waving at the woman. "You can sit with me." The father hesitated. He looked at the woman, uncertain, then at his daughter's pleading eyes. The woman shook her head. "It's okay," she said gently. "I don't have a ticket." The father paused for a moment, then stepped closer and asked, "Where are you headed?" She hesitated. "Nowhere, really." He looked at her face, the tired eyes, the trembling hands, and something about her reminded him of himself years ago, when he had lost his wife and felt like life had fallen apart. He looked down at his daughter and then back at the woman. "Come on," he said quietly. "It's getting colder. You can ride with us." The woman shook her head again. "I can't pay for a ticket." "It's fine," he said. "I'll take care of it." She hesitated, torn between pride and desperation. But when she saw the little girl still waving at her, smiling as if it was the most natural thing in the world, she gave in. Slowly, she stood up, picked up her small bag, and followed them onto the bus. They sat near the back. The father and daughter took one seat, and the woman sat beside them. The warmth of the bus felt like heaven against her cold skin. The little girl leaned against her father but kept glancing at the woman as if making sure she was okay. The woman looked out the window, watching the city lights blur past. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt safe. After a few minutes, the father spoke quietly. "Rough night?" She nodded. "A rough few months, actually." He didn't ask for details, and she was grateful for that. People usually wanted stories, explanations. But he just sat quietly as if giving her space to breathe. The little girl spoke up again, her voice small but clear. "What's your name?" The woman smiled faintly. "You can call me Miss L," the girl giggled. "That's a funny name." "It's the only one I've got right now," the woman said softly, smiling for real this time. The girl leaned closer, whispering, "You can sit with us all the way. Daddy won't mind." The father chuckled under his breath. "She's right. I don't mind." As the bus drove on, the woman felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Warmth not just from the heater, but from human kindness. She didn't know why this man and his daughter were being so kind, but she was thankful. The girl soon fell asleep on her father's arm. The man gently brushed her hair from her face, looking at her with a mixture of love and sadness. The woman noticed the small gold locket around the girl's neck, shaped like a heart. Inside, she guessed, was a picture of her mother. "You have a lovely daughter," the woman said softly. "Thank you," he replied. "She's all I have." The woman nodded slowly. "She reminds me of Hope." He smiled faintly. "She reminds me of her mother." There was a quiet pause. The woman looked down at her hands again, feeling the weight of her own loneliness. "She said something strange earlier," she whispered. "About me needing a home and her needing a mother." He nodded. "She says things like that sometimes. I guess she feels it more than she understands it." The woman smiled faintly. "She's a sweet child." They rode in silence for a while after that. The bus hummed softly, and the city lights faded as they drove toward quieter streets. The woman closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself rest, but part of her stayed awake, afraid it was all just a dream that would vanish when she opened her eyes again. When the bus finally reached its last stop, the man gently woke his daughter. The girl rubbed her eyes, sleepy and confused. "Are we home?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, helping her up. He looked at the woman, who was still sitting quietly, unsure what to do. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" She hesitated. "I was thinking about the shelter near the river, but they're usually full." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "It's late. The shelters might be closed by now. I have a spare room if you need a place for the night. It's not much, but it's warm." She blinked in surprise. I can't accept that. "It's not charity," he said. "It's just a roof for tonight. You can leave in the morning if you want." The little girl tugged her father's sleeve. "Please, Daddy, let her come. She looks nice." The woman looked at both of them, her heart torn between gratitude and fear. She didn't want to be a burden, but the thought of sleeping outside again made her shiver. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you," the man smiled softly. "Come on, then." "It's not far." They stepped off the bus together. The street was quiet and the air was cold enough to bite. The girl slipped her small hand into the woman's, and for a brief moment, the woman felt something she hadn't in a long time, belonging. As they walked, the little girl looked up and said, half asleep, "See? I told you. You need a home and I need a mommy." The woman didn't know how to reply. Her throat tightened and tears filled her eyes. She simply squeezed the child's hand gently, whispering, "Maybe you're right." For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. The night that began with cold and loneliness had turned into something unexpected, a flicker of light in her darkness. She didn't know what would happen next, but somewhere deep inside she felt that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change. The walk to their home was quiet, broken only by the soft crunch of their steps on the damp sidewalk. The little girl held the young woman's hand tightly, as if afraid she might disappear if she let go. The father walked beside them, glancing back every now and then, making sure she was keeping up. When they reached the small house at the end of the lane, the woman stopped for a moment, staring at it. It wasn't fancy. The paint on the door had started to fade and the garden looked a bit wild. But the warm light glowing through the windows made it look like a place where love still lived. She hadn't seen that kind of warmth in a long time. "Come on in," the man said kindly as he unlocked the door. The little girl ran inside first, throwing her tiny shoes to the side and jumping onto the small couch. The woman hesitated at the door, unsure if she should really step inside, but the man gave her a reassuring nod. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe here." She stepped in, clutching her bag close. The house smelled faint, of cinnamon and coffee, and the air inside was cozy. The walls were lined with pictures, mostly of the little girl, laughing, playing, and holding the hand of a woman who looked kind and gentle. The young woman's eyes paused on that photo for a moment. She didn't ask questions, but she understood the silence behind it. "You can leave your things here," the man said, pointing to a chair. "I'll make some tea." She nodded, sitting carefully on the edge of the couch. The little girl had already pulled out a few toys and was humming to herself. She looked up and smiled. "You can play with me if you want," she said innocently. The woman smiled faintly. "Maybe after I have some tea." The man returned a few minutes later with 3 steaming cups. He handed her one and she accepted it with both hands, feeling the warmth seep into her cold fingers. "Thank you," she murmured. He sat across from her. "You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to," he said gently. "But if you'd like to tell me your story, I'll listen." She took a slow sip of tea, letting the warmth calm her. Then, after a pause, she began to speak. "I used to work in a small cafe," she said softly. "It wasn't much, but I liked it there. The owner was kind. We were like a small family. But he sold the place and the new people didn't want to keep any of us. I thought I'd find another job soon, but days turned into weeks and my savings ran out. Then my landlord said I had to leave." The man listened quietly. The little girl stopped playing and came to sit beside her on the couch, resting her head on the woman's arm. The woman hesitated, but she didn't move away. "I tried to stay with a friend for a while," she continued. "But people have their own problems. You can only be someone's guest for so long before they start wishing you'd go. So I left. I tried the shelters, but they're always full. And then," she looked down at her hands. "Then I just stopped trying to explain myself to people. It was easier to be invisible." The man nodded slowly. "That's a hard road to walk," he said quietly. She smiled weakly. "It's strange. You think you'll be strong enough to handle anything. But once you lose your home, it's like you lose a part of yourself too." The room fell silent for a moment. The only sound was the little girl's soft breathing as she dozed off beside her. The woman looked down at her and smiled sadly. "She's beautiful," she whispered. The man nodded. "She's all I've got. Her mother passed away when she was 3. The woman's eyes softened. "I'm sorry." "It's okay," he said quietly. "It's been a few years now. Some days are harder than others. But she's the reason I keep going." The woman looked at the sleeping child again, her small fingers clutching the edge of her sleeve. There was a kind of peace in her tiny face, the kind that only children have when they feel safe. After a while, the man stood up and said, "I'll show you the room." She followed him down a short hallway to a small guest room. It was simple. A single bed, a little table, and an old lamp in the corner. But the sheets were clean, and there was a soft blanket folded neatly at the end. "It's not much," he said, "but at least you'll be warm tonight." The woman stood in the doorway, her eyes filling with tears she tried to hold back. "You don't know how much this means to me," she whispered. He gave a small, understanding smile. "Get some rest. We'll figure things out tomorrow." When he left, she sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand over the blanket. For a long time, she just sat there, too overwhelmed to lie down. She hadn't slept in a real bed for weeks, maybe months. When she finally did lie down, her eyes stayed open for a while, staring at the ceiling. She could still hear the faint hum of the heater and the gentle ticking of a clock somewhere in the house. That night, for the first time in months, she slept deeply, without fear, without cold, without the sound of strangers walking past her on the street. The next morning, she woke to the smell of something warm and sweet. She sat up confused for a moment before remembering where she was. She got up quickly, brushed her hair with her fingers, and stepped into the kitchen. The little girl was sitting at the table eating pancakes, her face covered in syrup. The man was making coffee. When he saw her, he smiled. "Morning," he said. "I hope you slept okay." She nodded. "Better than I have in months." "Thank you." "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair. "I made extra." At first she hesitated, but the little girl waved her over. "You can sit next to me," she said cheerfully. The woman sat down, feeling a warmth that wasn't just from the food. It was from the feeling of being seen, of being part of something, even if only for a moment. As they ate, the man asked gently, "What are your plans now?" She thought for a moment before answering, "I want to find work again." "Any kind of work, I just need a chance," he nodded. "I can ask around." A friend of mine owns a small diner downtown. Maybe they're hiring. Her eyes brightened slightly. You'd really do that? Of course, he said. Everyone deserves a fresh start. The little girl looked up at her with a mouthful of pancake and said, You can stay here until you find a job. Daddy won't mind, the man chuckled. She's not wrong, he said. You're welcome to stay for a bit, just until you get back on your feet. The woman was speechless. She didn't know how to thank them. I don't want to be a burden, she said quietly. You're not, the man said simply. We all need help sometimes. Days turned into a week. She began helping around the house, washing dishes, cooking meals, sweeping the floor. The little girl followed her everywhere, asking questions, telling stories, showing her drawings. The house, which had once felt quiet and heavy with loss, started to feel alive again. One afternoon, while the man was at work, the little girl and the woman baked cookies together. Flour covered the counter and the kitchen filled with laughter. When the man came home that evening, the smell of fresh cookies greeted him at the door, along with the sound of giggling. He paused in the doorway, watching them. The woman looked different, happier, lighter. The girl was glowing with excitement, proudly holding up a tray of slightly uneven cookies. Daddy, look. We made them together. The man smiled, a warmth spreading through him. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel lonely. That night, after the girl went to bed, the woman sat quietly on the porch, sipping tea. The man joined her, and for a while they just listened to the crickets outside. She's really happy, he said softly. The woman smiled. She's a bright soul. She makes it easy to forget everything else. He nodded. She hasn't smiled like this in years. They sat in silence again, both lost in thought. The stars above were faint, but the night felt peaceful. Finally, the woman said, I don't know how to thank you. For the food, the room, the kindness? You don't have to, he replied. Just promise me one thing, don't give up. Sometimes life breaks us, but that doesn't mean it's over. Sometimes it's just a chance to start again. She looked at him, his face calm and sincere, and for the first time in a long time, she believed that maybe she really could start again. As the night grew colder, the little girl called from her room. Good night, Daddy. Good night, Miss L. The woman smiled softly. Good night, sweetheart, she whispered back. Inside that small home, 3 hearts, all once broken in different ways, had begun to heal without even realizing it. And though none of them knew it yet, that simple act of kindness at the bus stop had already begun to change all their lives forever. The days passed quietly in that small house, filled with simple routines that slowly brought peace back into their lives. Morning sunlight would spill through the kitchen window, touching the table where the young woman now sat every day with a warm cup of tea. It had been weeks since the night she met them at the bus stop, and though she still felt like a guest, the house had begun to feel strangely familiar. She helped with everything, on cooking, cleaning, and sometimes walking the little girl to school. It wasn't something the man had asked for, but she did it out of gratitude. Every small task felt like a way to repay the kindness she had been shown. The little girl adored her. She followed her around, asking endless questions, making up songs, and drawing little hearts on paper for her. She called her Miss L, though sometimes when she was sleepy, she accidentally called her Mommy. Each time that happened, the girl's father would pause for a moment, a look of quiet sadness crossing his face, but he never corrected her. One morning, after dropping the girl off at school, the woman walked through the nearby park. The air was crisp and clean. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe again. She stopped at a small cafe by the corner and noticed a sign in the window. Help wanted. She stepped inside hesitantly. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air, and it reminded her of her old job. The owner, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, greeted her from behind the counter. Can I help you? I saw your sign, the young woman said softly. Are you still hiring? The owner smiled. We are. Do you have any experience? Yes, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I used to work in a cafe like this before. After a few more questions, the owner smiled and said, You can start tomorrow if you'd like. Morning shift. The woman's heart raced. She hadn't expected it to happen so easily. She thanked the owner again and again before stepping back outside. For the first time in what felt like forever, she had a job, a chance to stand on her own again. That evening, when the man came home, she told him the news. Tea. A little girl jumped up and clapped her hands. Yay, now you can buy ice cream, she said with a big grin. The man laughed. That's great, he said warmly. I'm really happy for you, her eyes sparkled. I can't thank you enough. You both gave me a place to rest when I had nothing. Now I can start again. Just promise one thing, he said. Don't overwork yourself. You've been through enough already. She nodded, smiling softly. I'll be fine, I just want to feel useful again. The next morning she woke early, dressed neatly, and left for work before sunrise. When she returned that afternoon, tired but happy, the little girl ran to her, wrapping her arms around her waist. How was your day? She asked. It was good, the woman said, smiling. Busy but good. From then on, the rhythm of their lives changed slightly. She worked most mornings while the man continued his job at a nearby repair shop. In the evenings, they would all have dinner together, the little girl chattering about her school day, the man listening with quiet patience, and the woman laughing softly at her stories. One night, as they were finishing dinner, the little girl looked up and said, Miss L, can you stay with us forever? The question caught her off guard. She looked at the man, unsure what to say. He smiled gently but didn't answer for her. The woman reached over and brushed the girl's hair from her face. Sweetheart, she said softly, nothing lasts forever, but I'll stay as long as I can. The little girl frowned. I don't want you to go. The woman's chest tightened. Let's not think about that right now, okay? Let's just be happy tonight. The girl nodded reluctantly and hugged her again. Later that night, after the girl had gone to bed, the man stepped out to the porch where the woman sat quietly under the dim light. She held a cup of tea in her hands, staring at the stars. She's grown really attached to you, he said gently. I know, she whispered. I didn't mean for it to happen, but she's so full of love. It's hard not to love her back. He smiled faintly. You've brought something back to this house that I didn't realize we'd lost. She looked at him surprised. What do you mean? Laughter, he said simply. After my wife passed, it was just quiet. I tried to keep things normal for her, but it's hard raising a child alone. She's happy again now. You did that. The woman looked down at her cup, her eyes soft. Maybe we all needed each other, she said quietly. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. Life settled into something calm and steady, something she hadn't known for a long time. One evening, the cafe owner told her about a small apartment available nearby. Nothing fancy, but affordable. The woman's heart skipped. She wanted her independence back, but the thought of leaving the little girl and her father filled her with a quiet ache she didn't want to name. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake in the small room, staring at the ceiling, torn between gratitude and fear. Part of her whispered that she should stay, that she'd finally found a family again. But another part reminded her that this wasn't truly her home, and she couldn't depend on kindness forever. The next morning, she mentioned the apartment over breakfast. The man listened quietly, his expression unreadable. That's great, he said after a moment. It sounds like a good step forward. The little girl, however, froze. You're leaving? She said in a small, hurt voice. The woman tried to smile. Not right away, sweetheart. It's just something I'm thinking about. Tears filled the girl's eyes. But you said you'd stay. The woman reached out to hold her hand. And I have. You and your dad have given me so much. I'll never forget that. The man stepped in gently. Sweetheart, she's not leaving because she wants to. She's just trying to build her life again. We'll still see her, I promise. The little girl ran to her room crying. The woman felt her heart break a little. That evening, the girl wouldn't come out for dinner. The woman went to her room and knocked softly. Can I come in? There was no answer. She opened the door slowly. The girl was sitting on her bed, hugging her pillow. The woman sat beside her. I know you're upset, she said softly, but I want you to understand something. When I met you, I didn't even have a place to sleep. You and your dad gave me hope. You helped me believe in life again. But part of believing means learning to stand up again, and that's what I'm trying to do. The girl sniffled, not looking up. I just don't want you to forget us. The woman smiled gently, her eyes full of tears. I could never forget you. You're part of my heart now. The girl finally turned and hugged her tightly. Promise you'll visit? I promise, the woman whispered. The next morning, the house was quiet as the woman packed her small bag. The man helped carry it to the door. The little girl clung to her side, refusing to let go. "I'll come see you every week," the woman said softly. "And maybe on weekends we can bake cookies again." The girl nodded slowly, wiping her tears. The man gave a quiet smile. "You'll always have a place here, you know that." She nodded, her voice trembling. "I do. Thank you for everything." As she stepped outside, the morning air was cool against her face. The street was calm, the same one she'd walked down that first night, only this time she wasn't lost. She had a job, a plan, and a little piece of her heart that belonged to a family who had once been strangers. As she walked away, she looked back once more. The little girl stood by the window waving. The woman waved back, smiling through her tears. That night, in her small new apartment, she sat on the bed, not the floor of a shelter or the cold bench of a bus stop, but a bed she had earned with her own hands. Still, as she looked at the empty space beside her, she couldn't help but whisper softly to herself, "You need a home, and I need a mommy." Those words, spoken by a little girl months ago, still echoed in her mind. And deep down she knew that no matter how far life took her, she had found something that could never be lost again. She had found love, the kind that didn't need blood or names to be real, the kind that healed quietly, through kindness, laughter, and shared mornings that once seemed impossible. And though she was now in her own place, she knew one truth for certain: that small home with the man and his little girl would always feel like home too. Days had turned into months since the young woman had moved in with the kind man and his little daughter. What began as an act of kindness had slowly grown into something much deeper. The house that once felt like a stranger's shelter now felt like a place she belonged to. Every morning, the smell of toast and the laughter of the little girl filled the small kitchen. The woman would hum softly while preparing breakfast, and the little girl would sit nearby, watching her with sleepy eyes and a smile that always melted her heart. The man often left early for work, leaving the two of them together for most of the day. They had their own little routine: morning walks to the park, grocery trips, story times before naps. The woman had started to feel a kind of peace she hadn't known in a long time. Yet deep inside there was a quiet voice that reminded her this wasn't her real home. She didn't own this life. She was still a guest, no matter how kind they were. One afternoon, while she was folding laundry in the living room, she heard the doorbell ring. It was the mailman, holding a few letters and a small envelope with her name written on it. It was from a local cafe where she had applied for a job weeks ago. Her hands trembled a little as she opened it. Inside there was a short letter offering her a position as a full-time kitchen assistant. It wasn't much, but it meant she could start earning again. The only problem, it was in another city about 3 hours away. She sat there for a long time, staring at the letter. Part of her felt proud that someone believed in her again, but another part of her felt heavy. It meant leaving this house, this peace, and most of all, the little girl who had become like her own. That evening, when the man came home, he noticed she seemed quiet. He asked if something was wrong, but she forced a small smile and said she was just tired. He didn't push further, but she could see in his eyes that he was worried. The little girl ran into the room holding a drawing she made. It was a picture of the three of them holding hands under a big sun. She proudly said, "This is our family." The woman's throat tightened as she looked at the paper. She smiled, but her heart broke a little inside. Over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about the job offer. She stayed up late each night, imagining what it would be like to start over again. Maybe she could rent a small room, save money, and build a new life. She didn't want to depend on someone's kindness forever. She felt guilty for staying this long, even though no one made her feel unwanted. On the morning she made her decision, the sun was just rising. She packed her few belongings quietly. A few clothes, a book the little girl gave her, and the blanket she had the day they met. She left a small note on the kitchen table, thanking them for everything, and walked out before anyone woke up. The walk to the bus station felt endless. Her heart pounded with each step. She tried to convince herself it was the right thing to do. She told herself that leaving now would save them from any awkwardness later. They didn't owe her anything, and she didn't want to hold them back. But as she sat on the cold bench at the bus stop, the same one where her story had begun, her chest felt hollow. Back at the house, the little girl woke up and ran to the guest room, ready to show her the flower crown she had made from paper. When she saw the bed empty and the note on the table, her tiny hands shook. She called for her daddy, her voice breaking as she said, "She's gone." The man read the note in silence. His jaw tightened, but his eyes showed sadness more than anger. He knew she had been fighting something inside, something she never said out loud. He quickly took his coat and told his daughter to get dressed. She clung to her teddy bear, tears streaming down her cheeks, and begged him to find her. When they reached the bus station, they saw her sitting on the same bench, clutching her small bag. Her eyes were red and she looked lost in thought. The man walked up slowly, his daughter holding his hand tightly. "You were really going to leave without saying goodbye?" he asked softly. She turned, startled, and looked down in shame. "I didn't want to make things harder," she said quietly. "You've both done so much for me already. I don't belong in your life like this. I need to stand on my own." The little girl ran to her, wrapping her arms around her waist. "But you are our family," she cried. "You can't leave." The woman knelt down, hugging the child tightly. "Sweetheart, you've given me more love than I ever thought I'd have again," she whispered. "But I can't take your kindness forever. I need to learn to live again." The man looked at her for a long moment. His voice was calm but full of emotion. "You don't owe us anything," he said. "But you're not a burden. You've changed this home. My daughter laughs again because of you, and I've started to believe in people again because of you." Tears filled her eyes. "You don't understand," she said. "Before I met you both, I had nothing. No home, no hope. And now I'm afraid of losing this too. That's why I thought it's better to leave before it hurts." He shook his head. "Leaving won't stop the hurt. It'll only make it worse for all of us." The little girl tugged at her sleeve and said softly, "Didn't you tell me that love means staying even when it's hard?" The woman froze. She remembered those exact words. She had said them to the girl weeks ago when the child was scared about her first day at school. Hearing them now broke her completely. The bus they were waiting for pulled up with a loud hiss. The driver called out the destination, the same city where her job was waiting. She looked at the bus, then at the man, then down at the child still clinging to her. Her heart battled between duty and love. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and whispered, "Maybe I don't need to run anymore." The man smiled gently. "Then don't." They didn't speak much on the way home. The little girl sat between them, her tiny hand holding both of theirs. The woman rested her head against the window, watching the city pass by, feeling an unfamiliar warmth fill her chest. When they reached home, the house felt different, not just a shelter anymore, but something real. That evening, as the three of them had dinner together, laughter returned to the table like it had never left. The woman realized that sometimes family isn't about where you come from. It's about who stays with you when you have nowhere else to go. Later that night, when the little girl was asleep, the woman stood by the window, looking at the quiet street. The man walked in, carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed one to her and said softly, "You don't have to decide everything now. Just stay for a while. See where life takes you." She nodded, smiling faintly. "I think I'd like that," she said. He looked at her, his voice warm. "You know, I never told you this, but the day we met at that bus stop, I was having one of the worst days of my life. I felt like I was failing as a father. But when you smiled at my daughter, everything changed. You gave us hope when we didn't even realize we needed it." Her eyes filled again, "And she gave me a reason to keep living," she said quietly. They stood there for a long time in silence, the world outside calm and still. The woman didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years she wasn't afraid of it. She had people who cared, and she finally believed she deserved that. As she turned off the light and looked at the sleeping child, she remembered those words that had started it all. "You need a home. And I need a mommy." She smiled, whispering to herself, "Maybe we both found what we needed after all." The days after she decided to stay passed quietly, but in the best possible way. The woman no longer felt like a visitor in that house. She felt like someone who truly belonged there. Every morning began with the same soft sound of the little girl's laughter, echoing through the kitchen as sunlight touched the windows. The woman would hum while making breakfast, and the little girl would chatter endlessly about school, her friends, and the new games she wanted to play after class. The man often sat at the table, watching the two of them with a peaceful smile. There was something different in the way he looked at the woman now, something gentle, full of gratitude and unspoken care. Their home felt alive again. The woman soon started working part-time at a nearby bakery. It wasn't far from the house, so she could walk there in the mornings after dropping the little girl at school. The owner, an older lady with a kind heart, was impressed by her dedication. She quickly became someone everyone at the bakery liked: quiet, hardworking, and always smiling even on the busiest days. In the evenings, she would come home with a small paper bag filled with fresh bread or pastries. The little girl would wait eagerly by the door, knowing there was always a sweet treat tucked inside for her. They would sit together at the kitchen table, the smell of warm bread filling the air, and share stories about their day. Life felt simple, but it was the kind of simple that made the heart full. One evening, as they were having dinner, the man cleared his throat softly. He said he had something to share. He looked at the woman and smiled. "The school is holding a family day next week," he said. "Parents are invited. I think it would mean a lot to her if you came with us." The woman froze for a moment. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. "I don't want to overstep." Before he could answer, the little girl spoke up quickly. "Of course you have to come. You're my family too." The man nodded. "She's right. You belong with us." The woman's heart swelled. She had never heard anyone say that to her before. The day of the school event arrived bright and sunny. The schoolyard was filled with families, parents taking pictures, children running around with excitement. The woman felt nervous at first, but the little girl held her hand tightly, as if to tell her she didn't need to be afraid. Together they played games, painted small crafts, and laughed as if they had been a family forever. At one point, another parent asked the little girl, "Is this your mom?" The girl looked up proudly and said, "Yes." The woman's eyes stung with tears, but she didn't correct her. For the first time, she didn't feel like pretending she didn't belong. After that day, something quietly shifted between her and the man. They talked more in the evenings, sometimes sitting on the porch after putting the little girl to bed. They shared stories about their past, the things they'd lost, the fears they carried, and the hopes they still had for the future. One night, it began to rain softly. They stood by the window, listening to the sound of raindrops hitting the glass. The man looked at her and said, "You know, I never thanked you properly for staying. You could have left and started over somewhere else, but you didn't. You stayed when we needed you most." She smiled faintly. "I think I stayed because I needed this too," she said. "I needed a place where I could feel seen again, where I wasn't just someone passing by." He nodded, his voice quiet but sincere. "You gave my daughter back her laughter. That's something I could never repay." For a long time they just stood there, the air filled with the sound of rain and the quiet warmth of shared understanding. Weeks turned into months. The woman continued working at the bakery, and the little girl continued to grow more cheerful, more confident. Their evenings were always full of small moments, reading bedtime stories, cooking together, and sitting on the couch watching old cartoons. One afternoon, the little girl came home from school with a small handmade card. She handed it to the woman shyly. "I made this for you," she said. On the front, in colorful crayon letters, it said, "To my mommy." Inside, the girl had drawn 3 stick figures holding hands under a big heart. Tears filled the woman's eyes as she hugged her tightly. The little girl whispered, "You're my mommy now. I don't care about anything else." The man watched from the doorway, his eyes soft. He didn't say a word, but in that silence, everything was understood. A few weeks later, the woman was promoted at work. The bakery owner trusted her to help manage the shop. It wasn't just about the extra money. It was about the confidence she had gained. She was no longer the woman who sat hopelessly at a bus stop, unsure of where life was taking her. She had rebuilt herself piece by piece with love as the foundation. One evening, the 3 of them decided to visit the same bus stop where it all began. The air was cool, and the streetlights glowed softly against the pavement. The woman looked at the bench where she had once sat, lost and cold. She smiled and said quietly, "This is where everything changed." The man nodded. Funny how life works. One small moment, one simple act of kindness, and everything turns around. The little girl held their hands and asked innocently, "If we didn't meet here, would we still have found each other?" The woman bent down and kissed her forehead. "I think we were meant to find each other," she said. "Some people are just meant to meet, no matter where life takes them." They stood there for a while, letting the memory of that night wash over them. The woman remembered how lost she had felt back then, how she had thought life had no more second chances. But now, standing with them, she realized that sometimes second chances come in the form of people, not events. As time went on, the three of them became inseparable. The woman wasn't just helping anymore. She was part of every decision, every plan, every dream. The man often caught himself thinking how empty his life had been before she arrived. Now the house was full of laughter, warmth, and hope. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, the man took the woman for a walk in the garden. The little girl was inside, drawing as usual. The air was cool, the sky painted in shades of gold and orange. He stopped under the old tree and turned to her. His voice was calm, but his eyes were full of emotion. "You've given us so much," he said. "You turned this house into a home again. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing. I don't want it without you in it." Her breath caught in her throat. Before she could say anything, he added softly, "Stay with us, not just as a friend, not just as someone passing through. Stay as family." Tears filled her eyes. "Are you sure?" she whispered. He smiled. "I've never been more sure of anything." From the window, the little girl watched them and clapped her hands with excitement, not fully understanding what was happening but feeling the happiness in the air. The woman nodded slowly, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes," she said. "I'll stay." That night, as they sat together for dinner, the little girl looked around the table and said, "Now we're really a family." And she was right. Years later, people who saw them together never guessed how their story began. To them, they looked like any other happy family, a loving couple with a bright, cheerful daughter. But deep down, they all remembered that it started with a single moment at a bus stop, when a little girl looked at a stranger and said, "You need a home, and I need a mommy." It was a simple sentence spoken from an innocent heart, but it changed 3 lives forever, and sometimes, that's all it takes, one small act of kindness, one brave word, one open heart to turn loneliness into love, and strangers into family.